It is Independence Day. I was reading an article this morning. I thought it was kind of disturbing to me anyways. It was disturbing. And it talked about how the flag of our country has become a divisive symbol. And that if you fly it, it means something to some people and something else to others. And it used to be something that was actually very unifying, you know, that we all thought of ourselves as Americans. And that was our primary identity. That's how we looked at ourselves. We didn't look at ourselves as this little group or that little group or this little tribe or something like that. We're pulling out of Afghanistan right now. And there's a lot of concern over that because of the fact that, you know, they don't really have, these people don't have an identity that's pulling them together. And that's something that we've always seemed to have had. We're celebrating the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was written 245 years ago. When they signed, the Revolutionary War was already underway. Lexington and Concord had been fought like a year and a half before. The war would go on for another 5 years. Yorktown wouldn't occur until 1781. So when these people, these 56 signers, put their names on this document, they laid down the foundation of this country. And it's been used as a source of pronouncements around the world for human rights ever since the time that it was signed. And that the ideas that they espoused in this document were really contrary to the thought of the day. They had to have known. They had to have known that if their efforts weren't successful, it would have surely meant death for them. That if this revolution didn't happen, and if they were on the losing end, they would have in fact lost their lives. If you look at the last line of that declaration, it says, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." So everything was on the line. So it was in a world where, at that time, if you had any rights as a person, it was because it was conferred onto you by whatever the rulers were. And yet these 56 men, they signed it anyways. And here we are, 245 years later, living in what many would consider, I would think, the greatest nation on earth. I mean, would you rather be somewhere else? Now, yes, it's not a perfect place, right? But think about it. What would it have been like if they hadn't been successful? What if the society had an even bigger imprint of the colonization, and that had a longer time to kind of steep into the society? What would that have been like? Yeah, there's work to be done. And you know, we've said that even amongst ourselves, you know, we've got, everything is a work in progress, right? Change does need to occur. Problems got to be solved. But remember, a couple weeks ago I said that, you know, I'm tired and I've got a mission. Well, yeah, there's going to be all those things, issues, more. And then we have to remind ourselves that we live in a fallen world. That we have people out there that are doing things for themselves. And we, as believers, have come to Christ, knowing that this is a fallen world. That our time here is brief, and that we're looking for the hope of something even greater. So with that, we've got to understand that our faith interacts with culture, all right? And that way we've got to understand how that context fits together. Where do we fit in this picture, and how does that mean that we can then have that conversation with other folks who either aren't with us right now, of a different belief, or maybe they're asking, you seem to have something interesting there. I'm kind of interested to hear what it is. So, can we achieve that change and deny God's sovereignty? Can we, without God's blessings, have that greatness? I'm not going to go through the entire declaration because it's really long. But there's the beginning part is really interesting, I think. And if it's been some time since you last read through it, I really would encourage you to do so. So here's a portion. And this is the beginning. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they alone are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But then a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. And then it goes on to list a list of grievances made to King George III. Now, we didn't hear direct references to the God of Abraham or to Jesus. But I think that you can get a sense that the authors were, in fact, believers. Now, you still, if you go out there, you find there's all kinds of debate about, does this document reflect Christian values? Or is it completely secular in its proclamation? We know that all 56 signers actually had an affiliation with Christianity of some sort. Some more mainstream than others, some less announced than others, much like society today. And I guess that since not all of them were outspoken preachers, 29 of them were, it might be argued that they weren't being influenced by their faith in God. A number of atheists like to point out that Thomas Jefferson was a deist. And it's not exactly what they want you to believe it is. It's a belief system where God actually flipped the switch and then society kind of carried on its own. But in 1803, even though Jefferson thought of himself as a person, a person of enlightenment, because that was the age of enlightenment, and a rational being, and he did, in a letter, write, "To the corruptions of Christianity, I am indeed opposed, but not to the genuine precepts of Jesus himself. I am a Christian," in the sense that he wished anyone to be sincerely attached to his doctrines in preference to all others, ascribing to himself every human excellence and believing he never claimed any other. So, not exactly a huge endorsement of atheism, as some would make you believe. Some other pieces of evidence of their beliefs. If you look at the grievances that were outlined in the Declaration of it, they intimate that government is not unlimited in its power over the people, and that God is so sovereign over all. Matthew 22:21 says, "Therefore render unto Caesar all things that are Caesar's, and to God those things that are God's." All men are created equal, reminding us that we are God's creation. And then there's that phrase that they were endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, meaning that God provided us with rights that cannot be taken away, and government-granted rights can be taken away. In Psalm 139, David sings that life is precious. "For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me, unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." Our belief that Christ sets us free. Now, the concept of freedom and liberty and unburdening ourselves are at the core of our faith. In Luke, the 4th chapter, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed." Maybe the forms of freedom and liberty, as Jeff pointed out earlier, a little bit different, but the concept that we have the ability to make certain choices of our own, to set our own path, and to be able to do it in concert with God. Well, that's always a good thing. There was the English jurist, William Blackstone. You have heard of him, right, from your law studies? The pursuit of happiness meant that God so intimately connected, so inseparably interwove the laws of eternal justice with the happiness of each individual, and that the latter cannot be obtained but by observing the former. And if the former be punctually obeyed, it cannot induce the latter. And he continued on saying that God's law is not only right, but it also produces happiness. And in John 10:10 it says, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." I was reading, there was a commenter by the name of Austin Klein he's an atheist, and making the case that the Declaration was not a legal document, but a statement making a moral case for the dissolution of the colonies. The part that I kind of took issue was with the idea of making a reference to morality. So I always like to go back to There's an apologist, the late Ravi Zacharias, and he said, you know, when you say there's too much evil in the world, you assume that there's a good. If you assume there's a good, then that assumes that there's such a thing as a moral law, on the basis of which to be able to differentiate whether there's good or evil. But if you assume that there's a moral law, you have to posit a moral law giver. But that's who you're trying to disprove or prove. So if there's no moral law giver, there's no moral law, and if there's no moral law, there's no good. If there's no good, there's no evil. So what's your question? So, and I saw a recent post on Austin Klein's Facebook admitting that, yes, actually, he made a mistake. Christ, he now believes, does exist. So not only were the founders, I think, influenced by the Bible in their writing of the Declaration of Independence, but I think they were also cognizant of the need of the believers to have that hope of gaining God's favor. They knew that this experiment, in order for it to work, they had to have that. And I think that as we have seen civilizations over the ages, if we didn't have God's favor, they didn't survive. And so we need to make sure that we not only carry ourselves in a certain way, but that we put ourselves forth to make sure that we have that we are following him, and that we're faithful to him. He has set a place on the table for us. And it's something that we need to keep in mind, that place is set, and that we should try to make room for others, to encourage others to have that place as well, that they can have that